Welcome to Broken, a podcast for the people, by the people. This show is born from a simple belief. We agree on more than we've been led to believe. But right now, it feels like everything is broken. Our politics, our media, and most importantly, our trust in each other. We are flooded with misinformation. We are divided by parties that don't really represent us, and we are stuck inside systems that were never designed with us in mind. Healthcare, education, housing, justice, immigration, economic policy, these are the forces shaping our lives, yet they're complex, deliberately confusing, and built on incentives that often serve corporations and those who lead them, not the public, not you and I. Broken is here to change that. Each episode, we will unpack these systems with experts who have spent their lives studying how they work and how they fail. Now, I have no agenda, no partisan loyalty. I believe in people. I believe in you. These are only data-backed conversations to help all of us see the bigger picture. Because knowledge is power. And the more of us who understand how these systems really work, the more power we have to fix them. This podcast is for the everyday American who's tired of rage-bait headlines, hollow sound bites, and being pitted against their neighbors. If you've ever felt like this country no longer represents you from either side, you're not alone. I am committed to making Broken as factual, balanced, and transparent as possible. But I am human and I'll get things wrong. This is a conversation between all of us. So hold me accountable, challenge what you hear, and ask questions. That is democracy. E pluribus union. Out of many, one. We are the many. Thank you for being here. Your attention, your values, and your voice matter. I'm Amelia. Let's dig in. Immigration is one of the most divisive topics in American life. It's also one of the most misunderstood and the most important. Today, we're going to break it down with a true expert. Our guest is Dr. Giovanni Peri. Dr. Peri has been studying immigration through an economic lens for almost 30 years. Right now, he is a distinguished professor in international economics at UC Davis and a research associate for the National Bureau of Economic Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He is the founder and director of the UC Davis Global Migration Center, and he sat on the editorial board for several academic journals. He has also been published in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Economist magazine, and many others. Today, we discuss who is coming to the United States and how, what the effects on local jobs and communities are, the situation at the border, the data on illegal immigrants, and what a better and more data-driven approach to immigration policy would look like. Dr. Peri, thank you so much for being here. I am excited to talk about immigration. I think it's one of the most misunderstood systems that we have, and yet it controls so much of people's lives in the United States. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm very excited to talk to you about it.
Before we get started, what is one thing that everyone who is listening to this or watching this should know about you?
Yes, so I am a professor, I am a father of 3 children and a spouse, of course. I grew up in Italy and I came to the US as a student to do my PhD. Before coming to the US, I did 1 year of civil service in Italy. This was the 90s, working in a center for refugees and immigrants. And that was a little bit where my passion for this topic started. Then I came to the US and I was a little bit on the other side. I was new in a country that I did not know really, but I was super excited by all the opportunity that I had. And then I did my PhD. I married my wife who was American and we stayed here. And I just love my work. I am, of course, doing research, but I'm also a teacher, a mentor, an advisor of a lot of students who by now are all over the US and all over the world, also researching and teaching about those topics. So what gets me excited is just doing research, talking about these topics and mentoring a lot of students over the years.
Awesome. I want to start very kind of high level on, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on how are people coming to the United States? What are the channels? And then what are kind of the methodologies that they use to come to the US? Can you walk me through this at kind of a high level?
So the legal immigration system in the United States is based essentially on three pillars through which people can come in. One is through family reunification, so to reunify with a member of your family, immediate family in large part, but also siblings, parents, children who are over 18. And this accounts for almost 2/3 of the entries in the United States. Then the second pillar is for working reasons. One thing to be said about the entry for working reason is that currently it really favors very strongly people who come with a college degree and for professional type of jobs. 1/3 of entries is under this category, but as I said, is very much skewed towards college educated and more. And then there is a humanitarian type of entry, mainly refugees and asylum seekers. And these, over the last decades, have counted for about 10% of people who are resettled in the United States as refugees.
Okay, so there's three buckets. You've got family members of both lawful permanent residents and citizens, correct? Not just citizens.
Correct. And
then you've got employment-based visas where people are coming to the United States specifically to work. And then there's the third bucket, which is humanitarian. And I believe that includes both asylum seekers and refugees. Do I have that right?
That's correct. The refugee and asylum seeker difference is refugee come in the United States already vetted by the United Nations, and they already have a status of refugee. The asylum seeker arrive escaping some extreme condition and they ask for asylum in the US. Some are granted asylum, some are not, depending on the severity of their entry. But the other category are, as you say, one thing I want to say about the work visa. The work visa require that there is an employer in the United States that sponsors a person. So essentially the people who come for a work permit, with a work permit, already have a job in the United States and an employer who sponsors them.
Yeah, I want to go deeper into each one. Really fast, though, not everyone is coming here directly to be a citizen, right? There are different types of visas or different type of permission slips that they are given kind of to enter the country.
Correct. So the three groups that we have discussed are groups that come in to become permanent resident, so to get a green card, what is called a green card. However, there are many more people that come on temporary visas, some of which are strictly temporary, so meaning that at the end people have to go back. Other are temporary, but they can be converted into green cards, so permanent residents. In the case of the visa, the most important and larger categories have been this H-1B visa, which have allowed a lot of skilled and highly professional immigrants to come in. And this is a visa that can be converted after 6 years into a green card, into a permanent resident. While other student visa, for instance, which is another very important, at the end, you need to go back to your country of origin. You are not allowed to stay. And then there are some more temporary type of workers, agricultural type of workers who also come in temporary visas. These are the visa category, which sometimes are so many, so confusing. But I want to say one unifying and important thing. If you study, as I've done, the data on immigrants that come in the US, and you look at all the foreign-born that come in the US, on any type of this visa, what you really see is that people who come in the US work at a rate which is incredibly high. In fact, they work at a rate which is higher than similar Americans. So even the people who come in on family visa, 80 to 85% of them are employed or of adult. And so this tells you a little bit that people come in the United States adjusting to the system in whatever type of visa they can get. But really the motivation for them to come is to work, to succeed. So if you talk about the American dream, which is work hard, find a job that fulfills you, then you can stay. Many immigrants really come with this idea. And if you look at their trajectory in the data from when they arrive to 20, 30, 40 years later, you see that the overwhelming majority find that employment is successful at very different level, depending on your education and the job. But the deep motivation in many cases is really economic, is job. And then the type of visa is whatever the person qualifies for.
Yeah, that's interesting. So people can come in through a green card. That's where they become a lawful permanent resident. They can come in through a permanent visa, like a temporary permanent visa, where they're allowed in kind of indefinitely until they try and become a citizen. Or they can come in on a pure temporary, and that would be something like a tourist visa.
A tourist visa, but also a student visa is purely temporary, meaning that you cannot convert it. You can sometimes find another visa that allows you to stay after you have studied, and then if it's a temporary, that can be converted into a permanent. You can do that. All of these statuses that we have said are eventually allow people to become permanent residents. To get the citizenship is even a further step. Once you're a permanent resident, though after 2 years you can apply for citizenship, and that's called the naturalization process. Of the foreigners who are in the United States, right now only about a third is naturalized citizen, even among the people who have a permanent residence, which, by the way, though, allow you access to most of the opportunities of Americans. You can find a job, you can, of course, have all type of contracts. You just cannot vote or be in a jury. That's the only hurdle of not being a citizen. So even of permanent residents, only, a certain percentage become citizen, but many of them stay as permanent resident throughout their life.
Interesting. So, okay, I want to go a little bit deeper into each of those three buckets that you mentioned, because I think it's interesting to understand kind of the numbers behind how many people are coming here and why are they choosing certain channels versus others. So family sponsorship, you mentioned that this is almost 2/3, is that correct, of all green cards? Okay.
Yes, it's correct.
Why is it that feels pretty large to me? Is it not?
Yes, it is, because it's the easiest way to come in the United States. If you have a spouse, if you have a close relative, and right now sibling, cousins, and this is a lower level of priority. If you have this type of sponsor, you have an easy time to come to the US. It's very straightforward. So I am a professor. I came in with a temporary visa, and I found a job in the US as a professor at UC Davis. But the easiest way to become a permanent resident was through family reunification, quote unquote, with my wife, who's American. And so I went that way. So in the bucket, I am entered the US to reunify with my wife. But the reason I really was here is to study and then to work. I met my wife, obviously, after that. So family reunification is the more straightforward. In particular, relative to work, work is much more constrained. There is given a very high priority to very highly skilled type of work. So don't be fooled by the name of work. If you have a job, or even if you have a company in the US that wants to hire you as a construction worker, as a plumber, as a cook, you're not going to get one of the work visa in the US. Only if you are a high-tech worker, a doctor, and then you are going to get one of these visas. That's why that's so much smaller bucket. But also that's why, for instance, for group of immigrants who have a lot of family in the US. So think of, Mexican, Central American, and now also Chinese who have a lot of family here. For them, if they want to really come to do one of these jobs in the US, the way is to try to reunify with one of their relative in the US.
That's a bit crazy to me. You have a PhD. You are a renowned economist, and yet you couldn't get a work visa, or at least it was a lot easier to go the family route than the employment route.
Yes, I was not as renowned when I did my citizenship, but I was a professor.
Educated.
I had 2 kids already in the United States. And for me, the easiest way was to reunify with my wife. Otherwise, I would have had to gather a lot of documents that showed how kind of unique I was as a worker, and that would have had many more hurdles. So yes, that is very odd and paradoxical.
The one other thing that I want to mention with family visas and family green cards is that it's not just immediate relatives, right? Although immediate relatives, I believe, get preference, or there's kind of an unlimited cap on the number of immediate relatives of citizens. But then there's this whole other bucket that is also allowed in, and that's adult siblings, adult children, and there's different kind of preference levels in the queue. Do I have that right?
That's correct. And without going too much into the detail of all the priority, the immediate family is the one that has priority. majority, but there are quite a few of these visas which are given to more extended family. And again, I mean, here, if you want to wonder why this is, and if this is still the best way of admitting immigrants in the US now, clearly this is a little bit of a leftover of the past when extended family was really crucial. And now the nuclear family has become much more important. And to me, it seems there is much less reason now to admit somebody just because he or she is the brother, sister, cousin, adult parents of a citizen than to admit somebody because they are doing a job that an American company is in need of, or because they have a skill that can be very useful and productive in the US. So that is still a little bit of a leftover of the past. As we talk about the American immigration system, we see that a lot of things are leftover of the past and they've not been changed for a long time, and they don't serve very well the need of the American economy, society, demography as it is now.
That was really interesting to me as I was looking into it, that a lot of the caps, a lot of the numerical caps or the quotas of how many percentage of people are allowed in different categories have not been reanalyzed, reset in decades. And yet we are a completely different country with completely different demographics. Is that because of a lack of resources, of attention, because there's a lot of noise here and people don't actually see what the problem? Why do you think there is so much kind of historical drainage or bias here?
Certainly, this must have to do with how controversial the immigration debate has been. The problem is that any of those rules and any of those numbers and quotas can only be changed by Congress. They need to be changed by a legislative act. And in the last 30 years, I would say. So the last one which had been set is this cap on the H-1B visa, which was introduced in the 90s and set at a totally arbitrary number, 65,000. If you ask any economist why 65,000, nobody will know why that was set back. And then it's been kept constant for the last 20 years.
So we picked a number arbitrarily and we have stuck with that number for years.
Absolutely. That's exactly how that cap has come. But also many of these, green card quotas and, caps are also relatively arbitrary. So what I wanted to say is that it has been incredibly hard to find enough consensus in Congress to even tackle any of the policies. And over time, this has become harder and harder because the polarization on this topic has become larger until the recent year in which really immigration has become this fighting ground for elections. And so nothing reasonable. To change these rules, you need a reasonable approach of people of different view that come together, look at the data, and talk about this. This has not been how immigration has been dealt with in the last 30 years, unfortunately.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you are a professor of economics who studies the economy through the lens of immigration. And what that says to me, economics is math. Economics is data. There is forecasting. You can look at a cause and effect here. So theoretically, we should also be looking at immigration through a lens of data, through a lens of we do this and this happens. Can it get that granular? Is there enough data? Is there enough kind of predictability here that immigration policy could be approached more reasonably with the right numbers, with the right information?
There is a lot of information in the data and enough granularity certainly to develop very informed understanding of what is the impact of immigrants in the economy, what is the impact of immigrants of different type of education and skills, what the distribution of immigrants across the U.S. community does to local labor market, to local growth. There is enough data to ask how many immigrants would the labor market absorb in the next year, just by looking at the number of job openings and the number of people who are looking for jobs in the US and trying to calculate what's the gap of people that we could absorb. There is enough data to see how immigrants integrate over time economically, how much tax they pay, how much they contribute to the fiscal point. Now, I want to make an important point. Whenever you touch immigration, of course, economics and demographics are one important aspect. People come in, they also want to follow values. They want to say there is also a political choice in terms of how many people who are not born American do we want. And I respect and understand that. The point is that economics should be one of the aspects that we consider, and then we want to weight that against other aspects. Unfortunately, currently, data and analysis is no part at all of the debate and of the immigration decision. That's got to be not correct, even for people who have a very strong view of preferences of how many immigrants you want. You still need to know what are the consequences and what are the costs or the benefit in order to plan. So that's where I think we really need to talk about these issues and try to put them into the debate.
We'll talk about the economic repercussions of immigration in a little bit. I want to go back slightly. So we talked about family reunification. That's 64% roughly of all green cards in recent years. Second is this employment bucket, which you mentioned already. We've talked about this a little bit. So people can come in through temporary ways like student visas, and then a lot of them, it seems like, end up staying in the country for employment. And then you can also have people come directly from other countries to work here. And then, but you also have different type of employment visas. This is obviously a little bit more of a complicated bucket. Tell me a little bit about what people need to know about those who are applying specifically to work in the United States.
Most of the people who are coming into the United States to work, sponsored by a company in the US, in the last 20 years have been overwhelmingly professionals. So the US attracts and employ a lot of people in this foreign people in the STEM sector, science, technology, engineering, and math. These are the typical people who come in, just take a look at who are the people who do, you are in Silicon Valley, information technology, but also in the healthcare sector, doctor, research, biotech. And as you said correctly, so these people come in and the priority, to just give an intuitive way of thinking, is given in this bucket higher priority to jobs that the government decides are harder to fill. And so the more specialized you are, the more you have a skill which is hard to find in the US, the higher priority you have. That does not mean really that we don't need other type of jobs. There is not very high demand for people who serve table, who cook, who clean rooms, but they are given a very low priority in this because the reasoning is anybody can do those type of jobs, but a PhD in nuclear physics that does this is very hard to find. So that's the criterion in general, and that's why highly educated are preferred. In terms of students, there are a lot of students who come to the US with student visa. So every year, 300,000-400,000 people come in to study in the US. Out of this, people who find a way of actually staying in the US, I have a paper that looks at this, are only about 20% of them, because it's hard to find a visa. The only visa that you have access, there is now this optional practical training or PT that allows you to stay a few years after study. And then there is this H-1B visa, which is the skilled worker visa. Finding directly a green card is very hard because of the selection. So many people try the H-1B, which however has a cap and is limited. And so our study that looks at the last 20 years in the US who came to study and try to see if they could find a job at least for 2 years, only find that 20-25% of people who graduated from the US do that. So on one end, this is a very big loss of human capital. These are people who have been formed, educated in the US that American university have invested, and many of them go back. On the other, as an upside, because the US in the last 20 years and more has been the educator of a lot of leaders who are in the world. These people are going to go back and they're going to be leaders in business, in finance, in politics, in government. And that has been a very large part of the soft power, in a sense, of the US globally. But yes, some of them stay. And again, contrarily to what people think, there is almost no room in that bucket, either of permanent residents or of temporary visa for people who do these jobs that we see a lot of immigrants doing, like, hospitality, hotel, food, construction, personal services. Very few of those jobs are given in those categories to immigrants. So a lot of those immigrants who do legally those jobs have come in through family reunification, through some other form, and then they have found a job their way. And we will talk about the undocumented, but a lot of people who do those jobs are undocumented because essentially this is not a path to come in to do one of those jobs in the US as a legal immigrant.
This is a really important distinction. I think when I have heard economists speak about this, they often use the language high-skilled laborers and low-skilled laborers. So highly skilled laborers, these are people that are educated. They usually have at least a bachelor's degree, if not a master's or a PhD. And then low-skilled is this group. It's mechanics, it's plumbers, it's hospitality, agriculture, healthcare, a lot of these other ones. Those are the two main buckets, correct?
Correct.
In the research that you have done, do you know if there is a need for both workers in the United States? Do we have a greater need for one or the other? Do we need all workers? How could employment visas best benefit the United States right now?
So these two groups of workers contribute to the economy in different ways. And I'm going to describe a little bit. That also tells sort of what is the right way of thinking of how many the US as a whole should allow, should absorb. So the highly skilled workers, and especially the immigrant highly skilled, because they really focus on science, technology, engineering, and math. Highly skilled immigrants don't come. There are not very many lawyers. There are not very many journalists. And you can think why, right? I mean, they know very well math and science is transferable across border, but law and journalism are really hard. So because of what they do, they really contribute to the growth of US science, technology, and as a consequence to the US productivity. Productivity is how much a firm can create new product, can create new processes, can be more efficient. This is economic growth because productivity means that each one can produce more, so the economy becomes richer. That group really grows the economy in a significant way. So in a way, in a sense, I would almost say that economists will argue that there is no upper bound to how many of those people, or at least we would benefit from a lot of those because those create opportunity. By the way, a very large percentage of those people are entrepreneurs and create firms. And immigrants are entrepreneurs at a much higher rate than Americans. Every one American entrepreneur, there are 3 foreign entrepreneurs per capita. So they clearly create opportunities, enlarge the economy. So that part, I think that's why there is a focus on that, is really driving and growing the economy in a massive way.
I want to just emphasize what you said, because I think it's important. Highly skilled immigrant workers massively increase the economic opportunity, the productivity of the United States, which correlates directly to GDP, to how much this country creates. Highly skilled immigrants directly increase that economic opportunity. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. I have a study that looks at highly skilled immigrants across US cities and try to use, in fact, the variation of this H-1B visa worker, which has been a major inflow of highly skilled. And that looks at how city productivity across the US vary depending on how many of these foreign highly skilled go, and finds that about half of the growth in GDP and in productivity and of wages, in the long run, even wages follow this productivity. Half of the growth in the period from 1990 to 2020 was driven by this immigrant worker because US grow productivity mainly through science and technological expansion innovation. The US is at the technology frontier. To become richer, it has to continue to have better ideas, good ideas. It cannot catch up on other people's ideas. We are the frontier, and that's how economic growth happens and expands to society. So yes, GDP growth and in the long term, wage growth as well come in large part because of this innovation, creativity, productivity, and growth. So that group is very beneficial. Now, a lot of sometimes kind of debate is about how many low-skilled workers do we need. So again, a little historical clarity. The period in which the US has had the largest inflow of low-skilled immigrants, so immigrants who have at most a high school degree and they do jobs which are more physical and manual intensive in agricultural, construction, personal services, hospitality. The period in which the US had the biggest inflow of this group was the 90s and the early 2000s. This group has started, the flow of people in this group have started declining significantly from the mid-2000s, and it has become much smaller in the 2010s up to COVID. Then after COVID into 2022, 2023, there has been a little bit rebound linked to this reopening of the border that we will talk about, but there has been a little rebound. So this group essentially has been shrinking, in fact, if you look at the data in the US. And my research shows that a lot of immigrants in this low-skill group also are beneficial for the American economy because they don't really compete with the job that similar American will do. They will tend to do more manual, physical, intensive type of job, and they will do less language, communication, interactive type of job because of a language. So if you think of a construction company, the immigrant will go and they will be often the builder, the construction, the workers. But the construction company also hire a lot of low to middle level of education Americans, and they are a little bit more the connector, maybe the sort of the leader of the crews. They are the head of a little team. They sort of also are employed as accountant, as engineer. So having this group of workers who take job expands the whole firm and structure employing other American, and that's why there is not a direct competition with Americans. So how many of these should we admit? I think that we should look at the labor markets again, as we said at the beginning, and see how many jobs opening there are in this sector and how many there are not. So maybe in the in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a very big inflow of mainly Mexican, and maybe there was a little bit of some competition effect from this. But in the recent years, first of all, this inflow has declined a lot. And second, the other important thing which is happening in the US, the US workers that do these jobs, the US labor force in this area is actually shrinking because of demographics. A lot of people who don't have an high school degree and do this job are aging. A lot of them are going to retire, and much fewer young people in the US are doing this job and are in that group. So at this time in particular, just to fill the jobs which there are in this sector, maybe this is a time in which we will want to increase somewhat the number of this low skill that we admit. But as we said before, right now there is no legal way really to allow some of these people to work, to come in on a work visa to do this type of jobs. So economists can tell you a lot and can direct you a lot, but right now we just don't have the policy and immigration, legal immigration structure to allow an increase of people in this group. And this is why a little bit in this recent inflow of 22-23, a lot of these people applied to a humanitarian admission in the US. That was sort of almost the only way that it was allowed them. But if you look at these people already in the data, they are working in the US. They are working in all these jobs that we have said, just with these temporary humanitarian visas, because again, many of them want to work and contribute.
I go on to the news and I read headlines that say things like immigrants are taking your jobs, they're taking my jobs, they're lowering my wages, they're decreasing the amount of opportunity that I have in the world. Is that true at all? Are there any Americans, especially in some of these smaller towns that are mechanics or plumbers or some of these jobs, are any of them losing out on economic opportunities because of immigrants?
So first, let me acknowledge how powerful is this narrative that you just said for everybody, including for economists. This idea, immigrant take your jobs, has been the line since I started this work in the 90s. Maybe I started working on this more in the late 90s, has been the word that everybody who was against immigration just immediately brought. That's one. The other is that we need to acknowledge the fact that American workers at level of wage, which is medium to low, have not done very well in the last 30 years in the US. This is also a fact in the data. Their wages have not grown a lot. Their earnings have not grown. And other problems have piled up to a lack of economic certainty and economic growth. Now, let's go to the job story, the immigrant take your job. A simple answer to that is that jobs are not fixed in any economy. Jobs depend on how many firms invest in that economy And how much firm invest and how many firm come depend on how many people are there and demand goods and services, and how many people are there and can supply the skills that the firm needs. So more people in an economy is clearly more people who can do a job, but also much more opportunity for firms to sell and produce at the local level. If you look at the economies of US cities or all countries, you always see that an increase in the number of people who are employed, an increase in the local population, correspond to growth in that city or in that economy, correspond to more goods demanded, more service needed. There are more workers that can do these services. And also, if the variety of worker, the type of skills that you have becomes larger, more different type of firms can come in. So immigrants come in and they supply either the science and technology skills and the manual work. These increase the range of sectors and companies that can come in and hire and produce jobs also for other people. I think the answer to the immigrant take your job is this concept that economists have found over again, which is called job multiplier. One job in a location is connected and generates demand for many other jobs. So if you have, a construction workers that come in a place so that the construction company can grow, construction company will need material to use and will provide also more reasonably priced houses so that people can come in. For an engineer that come in a place generates need for people who work with him and or her, and obviously will also spend and demand at the local level. So normally, one extra job in a place generates more jobs. And that's what immigrants have done. You talked about smaller community. There are, in fact, some communities, smaller and declining in the United States, which have been revitalized sometimes by the inflow of immigrants. And again, sometimes there could be a difference in the immigrant that come in that has generated also tensions, that has generated problems. But again, from an economic and demographic and dynamic point of view, in many places, new immigrants allow the possibility of new restaurants coming in, of new stores, of new opportunities, new companies joining, and local communities goes from decline to growth with benefits for the locals. So this type of contribution, job multiplier, complementarity, meaning doing job that are different from natives and help each other, those are most of the results that economists find when they analyze the inflow of immigrants, rather than this job stealing effect, which, again, in some very specific sector, in some specific period, there could be competition so that immigrants take a sector and native move out of it. But in the complexity of the economy, this movement sometimes is good. Sometimes native do find other jobs which are also helped by the fact that immigrants are taking those. So the picture is normally one of growth when they come in, also for American workers.
I feel very misled by the media and by the people that are kind of propagating this belief because it has been so powerful. You are saying, just to reiterate, undocumented immigrants, legal immigrants, everyone is not taking American jobs because additional jobs, additional employed people, more workers in the United States means additional jobs after that and general economic growth. So immigrants actually increase the economic opportunity. They increase the amount of jobs and wages for everyone at a macro level.
Absolutely. At an aggregate level, they increase the size of the economy, the GDP per capita, as we said, and the average wages. Then people ask, okay, but if a lot of immigrants only of one type of worker will come, that type of worker in the US will be hurt? And the answer is yes. From an economist, if you only have immigrant coming in as construction worker, the construction worker market will be flooded and there will be a decrease. This is really a total caricature of what immigrants are. As I said before, first of all, they come in the whole range. They are incredibly highly educated and less educated. In the last 20 years, is the part of very highly educated that has come in larger number. And in fact, we have shortages of the less educated. But even the less educated come in a range of jobs, and Americans have a range of jobs. The economy is complex. So take, for instance, assistance of the elderly people in the US, a job that will become incredibly important, already is, where there is a huge shortages. This job does not have very Americans doing it, and there are a lot of immigrants coming in. Think about the consequences economic of more immigrants doing those jobs, on which there is a lot of research. So if more immigrants make it more affordable and more possible to assist our elderly people at home, it has been shown that many, in particular women, who otherwise would have to do the assistance, could go out and work, could be in the labor market, could gain. So immigrant coming in actually expands the job opportunity for natives, because natives want to do other jobs. They don't necessarily want to only assist the elderly, but they want to be in the labor market. This by itself will be a very important local multiplier effect. And I mean, agriculture is another very clear case. There are very few Americans who will go in the field and pick up, but there is a huge demand for agricultural goods, local, organic farms in the US. With immigrants coming in, that will allow this sector to grow. And the food restaurant industry, which instead employ a lot of Americans, then can also grow as a consequence of that. Is this interaction, complementary, difference of skills between immigrant and native that makes them not take away job, but fill jobs that otherwise will be very hard to fill, and grow the economy with opportunities for American workers and American firms as well.
Why do you think this narrative of immigrants taking jobs and lowering wages has been so pervasive?
This narrative starts again from a real issue. The U.S. workers have not been doing very well in the last 30 years. Their wages have not grown that fast, not as fast as college-educated wages. Employment has not been, coming at the rate that used. Many of those traditional stable jobs that employed those people, everybody talks about these manufacturing jobs, they have gone away because manufacturing has become a much smaller share. So there is a group of middle to low income American workers who feel the pain. Economic, and then this has also spilled over other parts of society. They have had problem, with addictions and other. This is a real issue, and anybody who can speak to some solution, I think, of that particular problem, which is very complex and hard to crack, will have a lot of support, a lot of interest. Now, immigrants are relatively easy to blame, and they are very easily identified. So everybody can point at the fact that some of these manual physical jobs that 40 years ago were done by America now are done by immigrants. And so the idea that they have taken that job is easy to sell. And the fact that the immigrants are different from us, and so the fact that the American middle class has done poorly because of somebody else, because of somebody that looks different from us, is very powerful. And also, if really it's immigrants that have caused all the trouble of American, the solution is very easy. Just kick them out and close the border, and you have a solution. So a real problem rooted in the last 30 years of labor market outcome, with a solution that in no way is a solution, because, the economy has changed a lot. The problem of American come from, mechanization, automation, outsourcing, globalization, declining power of the unions, stronger bargaining power of companies and firms. None of them has to do with immigrants, but immigrants who instead have helped the economy to grow and stay afloat are easy to single out and to blame. And the solution is easy. And I think now they are acting on this potential or kind of so-called solution.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I have a family from a small town. You drive through the Midwest, you drive through the South, you see a lot of small towns that feel like they're struggling. The economics of that town has changed a lot. There used to be a lot of manufacturing jobs in a lot of these places that no longer exist. So I think there's real pain here of the economics of this class of Americans is not going well, as you said. That is true. And immigrants are not the problem, it seems like. There are other factors that are influencing that lack of economic opportunity, and there are other ways to fix that or to mitigate that. Reskilling programs, helping people kind of up-level into new careers. Immigrants are not the problem, though. There is, both of those facts can coexist. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. If you look at the geography of the problem also, and the geography where immigrants are, they don't even correspond almost at all. Immigrants are mostly in dynamic, growing cities. Immigrants are in San Francisco, Los Angeles. Some of them are in smaller towns, but much fewer. Immigrants, even in the state which have a more anti-immigrant sentiment, they are in Dallas, they are in Austin. These places which are a little bit more rural, a little bit more in the south of the US and the Midwest, normally have very small percentages of immigrants, really, but they feel left out from this growth that is happening elsewhere. And in fact, I would say if some of those cities were able to attract a few more immigrants, probably they will generate a dynamic that will help even more. Sometimes it's the lack of people who will go in those places, the population, which is the real problem. And then these people just, I guess, hook on to some explanation or some news, and maybe occasionally they see an immigrant. That seems to be easy. So the geography of the US growth is that the cities where most immigrants have gone and the location are actually doing much better in terms of growth and labor market than the places where very few immigrants have gone.
I want to reiterate some of the things that I have learned so far. So for the employment workers, for the immigrants that are coming into the United States to work, which it sounds like is actually kind of a hard thing to do, you've got the highly skilled workers, and this is a lot easier to get in. There maybe not as much as family, but there's more visas available for that. And then you've got kind of the manual laborers. And if you are manual labor, it is almost impossible for you to enter through an employment visa because you're not preferred. And at the same time, your research has shown, again, over 30 years you've been doing research, that both types of workers actually increase the economic opportunity, increase the wages, increase the amount of jobs across small towns and cities across the United States generally. All of that is right?
All of that is correct.
I want to give people a little bit of context on the numbers here. So I did some research, and employment visas are only about 17% of green card holders in 2023 versus family sponsorship was 2/3. I also thought it was interesting that for that H-1B visa that you mentioned, which is specifically for at least college educated, there were 85,000 visas available in the fiscal year of 2023, and yet there were over 700,000 registrations submitted by U.S. employers. These are, just so I understand, these are U.S. employers who have said, we want these people for our company. I want them to work with us. There were 700,000 of those and only 85,000 available.
Yes, not only this employer said we want this, they had identified one specific foreign workers that filled all the boxes, and they had produced all the documentation that the Department of Labor requested to show that they did not have an American worker who would do that. And nevertheless, those 700,000, what you said, plus companies will go on April 1st to apply for, which is when the fiscal year begins, to apply for one of these 85,000 visa, and they will be put in a lottery that will say essentially only 1 out of 10 of you will receive, because the number of people who are actually in company who actually get an H-1B is drawn from this lottery.
It's a lottery, which means it's complete chance.
Completely random. It's completely random. It has been a lottery because there has been this oversubscription since 2013, just with the exception of the COVID year in which there was no lottery. It's a lottery because this cap of 85,000 people, in principle, is what the US government says should last the whole year. So then if there are only few people who apply every month, they will distribute these 85,000. In the last 10 years, just April 1st, there were this 700,000 company ready to hire somebody. And because all present their application in the first week, they are put in this pool and they are randomly drawn. So not only it's a limited number, but there is no efficiency or productivity rationale in giving them out. And so only 1 out of 10 will win this. And the other companies will try to find some ways to deal with that. Many of them will not take as many projects as they had planned. Some of them will try to find some local or try to find another. There are a few other limited visa to get workers here, but definitely this is another sign of the very strong rationing in a sense and the very strong, much larger demand than supply for these workers.
That is crazy to me that these employers want these people. And as you mentioned, I think an important point, these employers have proved that this job is not being taken by the international person over someone local. These are jobs in addition to that. And as you mentioned as well, all of these jobs, theoretically, if we hired all 700,000 people, they would increase the economic opportunity of everyone. I mean, that's almost 10 times as much if it was a ratio there, right?
Yes, I have to say that given that this lottery by now has become the way in which companies do, it may be that in the last couple of years, there has been even a little bit of a ballooning. So some company really identify 4 or 5 people when they only need 2 because they know that they have such a low chance. But this oversubscription of the lottery is something that has happened regularly in the last 10 years, and the oversubscription has become more and more severe. I think in 2013, there were only twice as many applications as a visa, and then has become now 10 times more because also companies are trying to adjust. Certainly, one very logical thing, and I think we'll talk about what policy changes seem logical or feasible. For a long time, there was a discussion of increasing the cap of the H-1B, allowing a larger number of H-1B to come in. Doesn't seem to be discussed any longer, but this seemed to be a very reasonable and very easy things to do if you agree on.
We'll talk about future of immigration policy changes that you would make in a little bit. I want to move to something that is very controversial, that is very relevant right now, and that is undocumented or illegal immigrants. It is obviously a hot topic in the news right now. It has been for the last decade. I think it's important to understand what an undocumented immigrant is. Can you tell me a little bit about what that word means?
An undocumented immigrant is an immigrant who has entered the United States either without proper documentation and therefore did not have at the moment of entry an authorization to work, or it has entered with a visa who is temporary and has overstayed the visa who is temporary. Typically in the past, in the 1990s and 2000, which was the period of largest inflow of undocumented, half of them entered through the southern border, and then maybe half or a little fewer overstayed the visa. And in the recent period, actually, the crossing of the border has declined a lot for undocumented, and most of the undocumented are people who overstay their visa. That's in terms of entry. Unfortunately, this way of entering, which is not regular, this irregularity at entry, can never be fixed in the life of an undocumented immigrant. These people now have been in the US, many of them, for a very long time. By the way, the estimate currently is that there are about 11 million of these undocumented. 8.5 million work. They work, quote unquote, irregularly in the sense that, they don't have the proper authorization, but they do completely irregular jobs. They work in the fields. They work in construction sites, in hotel. And they have been working, on average, more than half of them have been in the U.S. for 10 years or more. Many of them have children who are born in the U.S. Most of them have contributed throughout their life by paying Social Security taxes on a fake Social Security number. They, of course, pay all the consumption taxes, the housing taxes through the price of rent that they pay. And this group has been fundamental in terms of being employed in some sectors, in particular agriculture, construction, personal services, hotel and hospitality services, and home services. These are workers, and these have been a very important part of these sectors. In some states, like California, about 7-8% of the whole labor force are undocumented worker. And for some sector like construction, 20 to 25% are undocumented workers. So some sectors in states of large immigration very heavily depend on undocumented immigrants.
The first thing you said I didn't know. So you can become an illegal or an undocumented immigrant by crossing the border, which is, I think, what most people think about when they think about an illegal immigrant. But they could also come in legally and then continue living here even when a visa has expired. And you said that was an overstayed visa. So there's a significant portion of these undocumented immigrants that actually did enter the country legally, but then when they were supposed to leave, they didn't. Am I understanding that?
That's correct. And the visa that they entered on did not allow renewal probably, and nor a transition into some work visa or some more permanent status. So they just stayed when the visa was expired. And many of these did not come through the border. And they are undocumented immigrants from Asia and Latin America, although Mexican and Central American are the largest share of undocumented immigrants now.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I was surprised. It seems like when I looked at the data, it was actually over 60% of undocumented immigrants are those overstayed visas versus have come in through the border illegally. And it's kind of crazy that we allow these people in. They have their families here, they get a job, they are kind of settled here in a way, and then we almost give them no way to then renew their visa. We give them no option to continue living here. And so it feels almost like they don't have any other choice but to stay here. Otherwise, it's go back to your country where you were making 1/10 of what you were here, where there was political violence. Is this another thing where there is a logical solution maybe of we have all of these undocumented immigrants who've been here for years and years and years and came in legally, and we just need to give them a way to stay legally and contribute to taxes and Social Security and all of these programs?
There have been in many instances over the last 20 years, this proposal and idea for regularizing at least a very big part of this, because many people recognized that they are contributing, they are living in the US, they contribute to the economy. For a long time, there was this very strong consensus that there is at least of this 11 million, around a couple of millions are people who arrived when they were children with their family. There was a consensus that at least this group, which then became known as the DACA people, the Defer Action on Arrival, that was essentially preventing deportation for them, this group of people should have found a legal way to stay in the US. I produced a lot of studies that looked at the economic benefits of legalizing immigrants and how this would have allowed them to get a little bit higher wages, so more mobility in the US, so more ability to spend, better living. And so this would have also benefited the local community where many of them are. They would have encouraged more investment because there was less uncertainty on their status. And this, amounted to $1 billion in aggregate of positive economic effect of regularizing them. So absolutely, I would say that logically, economically, demographically, it will make a lot of sense to regularize a lot of them, because if you're not committed crimes, if you have been in the US, if you have worked, if you are rooted in the community, it will make so much sense for them to stay, especially in a period in which, as I was saying before, they do jobs on which we have a very hard time finding workers. And if they also start leaving or not being here, or even just being scared and staying at home, this will have a big impact on the employment in these sectors.
I want to clarify something that you said, which was there is no legal way for undocumented immigrants to become permanent, lawful residents right now. There's not a single pathway for those who have come in, even if it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. There is no legal way for them to continue staying here.
Absolutely. There is no legal ways. There have been cases that you can count on one hand of people who have found through some very particular situation. I want to say another thing. Not only there is no legal way. If they were to go back to their country of origin, Mexico, Central American, and apply to enter legally, They are not authorized because once you have been in the US illegally, you have lost the ability of entering in any way. So these people are stuck. And this is a difference between the United States and any other country, rich country that I have studied in the world. I do a lot of work on immigration in Europe. Europe has had a very large inflow of immigrants in the 2000s and 2010. And some countries like Italy, Spain, France, Greece have gone from very few immigrants to having as many immigrants as the US in percentage. All of these countries have passed what they are called regularization of their immigrants. Spain has passed 2 famous regularization. Italy has passed 3 of them in the last 15 years, which means that people who were in the country working, not committing crime, who entered irregularly as the American, would have a path to become a regular worker. The US has never done this, has only done one regularization in 1986, and after that, none. So we are in a very anomalous situation for this group, most of which, as I said, work, are honest people, don't commit crime, and they are very rooted in the community where they are.
I want to emphasize that point of these are not people that are sitting in their houses, hiding from the world, being a drain on healthcare and other resources. A couple of numbers to contextualize this. In 2023, undocumented immigrant households paid almost $90 billion in federal, state, and local taxes, and they held $299 billion in spending power. And immigrant households paid nearly $16.80 in every $100 of tax collected. And they make up almost 4.7% of the workforce, despite only being 3.4% of the population. So as you said, they're working more than the local populations. They're already spending massive amounts of money. A lot of them are paying taxes with the barest of hopes that they could continue staying in this country. And on top of that, your research has shown that if there was a naturalization process, that billions of dollars in spending power would actually increase substantially.
Yes, that is all correct. And I will add that because they are paying into the system through Social Security, through other indirect taxes, but because they are undocumented, they don't really qualify for any of the welfare support. Of course, they cannot draw unemployment insurance. Of course, they cannot draw on, food stamps or on welfare support. They have costed very little. So this narrative that, these people are here and they cost to our government is almost opposite to what they are. They really are contributing in much more than they're taking. And the other statistic that you quoted, that they are employed at much higher rate than American, certainly at much higher rate than comparable American. Remember, these people don't have a high school degree in most cases. American without an high school degree have an employment rate around 60%. They have an employment rate around 85%. And this is because they need to work. That's the only way in which they can support themselves in the United States. And they work. And as we have mentioned before, they are the backbones of a lot of these sectors in the U.S.
This is crazy to me that these illegal immigrants are so villainized. We look at them, the media portrays them as massive drains on our society. Is there any truth? Is this true for the entire United States? Are there any locales? We see California specifically gets a lot of news about illegal immigrants. Are there any negative repercussions of naturalizing illegal immigrants today?
My answer would be no, for what I know. So the situation that we have described is really a situation of the undocumented all over the U.S. Just different states differ in how many undocumented there are, but this profile of being working, contributing, not being in any way involved in criminality is really a profile common to most of them. I don't want to say that there is no individual who is a criminal among the undocumented. There are 11 million of them. So even at very low rate, there are people. And I agree. I mean, those people should not be allowed a regularization. I think we should do a screening, as we do for people who come in, of who can access this. But this is going to end up being a very small minority, very, very, very small minority, while the majority will benefit massively and will benefit the local community by regularization. So you said, is there any reason to kind of think that there could be negative repercussion of regularization? A lot of these people came into the United States in the 90s, early 2000s, when the border was a way more open and porous than is right now. And some of them concentrated in some areas. So, for instance, Arizona, Nevada, some part of California had a lot of these workers. If I look at my study and the study of other that has studied immigration overall, I would say that some states in the United States that received a lot of this concentrated in a period of time probably did observe the competition of this worker reduce somewhat the wage and the opportunity of Americans in those states in those periods. So there have been, because of this massive inflow in some places, some competitive effect. But by now, these people have been absorbed 20 years in labor market. By now, that little dynamic of competition has completely transformed because the state also have had a big reduction in this number of workers. So eliminating this worker right now will not fix the little negative impact on wages that they had back then, and will exacerbate right now the shortages that instead they are experiencing. So we are at the moment in which I really don't see any economic benefit that a reasonable person, based on the data, will see in deporting or scaring or somehow getting rid of a large part of these undocumented.
So allowing undocumented immigrants to become citizens with screening processes, have you paid taxes, have you committed crimes, etc., would massively increase their spending power. And on the inverse, deporting these immigrants who have been in the United States for decades at this point would actually hurt us.
Yes, will hurt us and will cost us a lot, because if you really want to set up an operation that finds, identify, and deport these people, are going to be in several billions of dollars that the central administration will have to pay. There are many other potential benefits of a well-designed regularization. For instance, a well-designed regularization will allow them to come out, and they themselves will want to be identified, and so this will allow us to isolate who are the problem cases, who are the criminal, who instead will not maybe want to come out. So we can focus. If there is a safety issue, we can really focus on some people rather than the 11 million, rather than randomly going to a place where people are looking for jobs for the day and saying, you guys don't have documents. So this will allow us a more efficient, a more targeted, if the problem is perceived by some as a security safety measure, will allow big economic increases. And also, let me last say, there are a lot of situations which are a way complex in terms of consequences on families. There are many families in which one person is documented, another is not. The children are US born. So if you deport the father of a family who works and the children who are American have a right to stay in the US, what kind of situation are you going to create? If you are breaking families because there are some documented and other not, you create additional costs. So now the bread earner cannot be it anymore, and now you have a family that has a problem. So I see so many complex issues and problems in deportation, so big economic cost and such an amount of direct cost that it seems to me really so irrational to go for this type of solution of the problem.
Yeah, as you said, it seems like deportation is a false Band-Aid on a very complicated problem. And there are people that want to say that, hey, if we just deport all of these people that came here illegally, that are taking your jobs, that are lowering wages, all of which we've already established are false, then your problems will be fixed. And that is not the case. I've worked in restaurants, I've worked in the service industry. I have met so many lovely, lovely undocumented immigrants who are an integral part of these businesses businesses and work so hard. They show up every day to work and they are not taking anybody else's opportunities. And it feels very sad to me that they might be stuck here with their kids. They might have a wife that's a citizen or other family members that are citizens and won't have access to the same benefits, that won't have access to the same resources, even though they've been paying for these their entire lives. It feels so misaligned here. Do you feel similarly? Does this make you frustrated?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It makes me very frustrated. Talking to people like you and many other people who I know, when I talk about my research and my finding, actually, the comforting thing is that a lot of people at a personal level have observed exactly the same thing. In a city like Davis, where I live, if you have a household like mine in which you need some person to clean the house, some person to take care of the garden, you will have dealt with a lot of these undocumented who are smart, efficient, honest, and they do this work, and you look around town and nobody else is doing this. But on the other hand, there are a lot of other Americans who are doing a lot of other jobs, and they are really benefiting from this. So when I talk and when I see their life outside, I really see the benefit and I see my research. When then I hear some of the rhetoric that says, then I don't recognize myself there, and it's a little hard. There are some moments in which people recognize the value of immigrants. So I felt like during and after COVID, the moment in which, a lot of workers could not work, and we understood how important these immigrants were because they were the first to go back to work. They were the first to restart the restaurant. Even in the healthcare sector, there were a lot of immigrants. At that point, a lot of Americans felt a gratitude and understood that they were, but then that dissipated relatively quickly, and just the narrative of this immigrant taking your job has taken over again. But we need to talk. Maybe talking and maybe discussing some of these points helps.
Yeah, I think I sit down with people on all sides of the political spectrum, and I think we agree that there is a humane way to look at this, and there's a data-focused way to look at this. And I think I would warn myself and others about jumping to conclusions about believing things in the media just because someone says them. It is very easy to blame someone for your problems, but there's a lot of data here, as you've mentioned, that you've spent years and years studying that shows that the story isn't always how it's portrayed publicly.
Yes, and we do need to find reasonable solutions for the people who have this problem, but these problems are complex. So an immediate solution may not be what is available, but the understanding what the data say is important because they will lead us into the right direction or into the wrong direction.
You mentioned a very common fear, I think, with legalizing undocumented immigrants, and that is crime levels. Have you studied the extent to which all immigrants, undocumented or illegal, what extent are they committing crimes compared to naturally born, native-born Americans?
So here I have to plug the work of a colleague of mine here at UC Davis, Santiago Perez, who has done probably the most comprehensive and the most beautiful study on crime rate, comparing immigrants to US born. And he has data that goes back really to the 1800 on crime and incarceration. And he actually finds constantly that throughout history, but in the last decades particularly strongly, the crime rate of immigrants, including undocumented, is significantly lower than the crime rate of American. The crime rate in violent crime is even much lower than the crime of American. I mean, in a sense, it makes so much sense. These people come here to work. They don't want to attract attention. They also will have a much harder way probably to get hold of a gun because, buying it is not allowed to them. And so they come and they work and they stay with their family. And therefore, crime is the problem of which they are victims sometimes, but they are definitely not at the same level. So all the data over and over again find this effect. And again, let me separate this to the issue of international gangs, sometimes related to, smuggling, crossing the border, transporting weapons across the border. There are some very dangerous international gangs who come from, even based in Latin America, which have real impact. But that's not who the immigrants are in the US. They may have been smuggled sometimes, but most of them come to work, come to, be law-abiding citizens, and that's what the data show.
So we're talking about immigrants that are already in the United States. Once they're in the United States, we can look at the crime rates a little bit better. I looked at your colleagues' research and some of others, and in 2020, they found that immigrants were 60% less likely to be incarcerated than U.S. born. It was also interesting, I thought, that U.S.-born citizens were 10 times more likely than immigrants to be put in prison for weapons-related offenses, 5 times more likely for violent offenses, twice as likely for property crimes, and twice as likely for drug offenses. So on every single type of offense, native-born Americans are more likely to commit those crimes than immigrants. Another very common myth, right, that has been so pervasive. Is this a similar thing of there's just a lot of fear around this, there's a lot of misunderstanding, it's easy to blame people when societal problems go wrong?
Yes, you summarized this very well. Those numbers speak for themselves. And this research, not just by this group of colleagues over and over again, finds this regularity. And again, sometimes when you do this research, you wonder, how did the message get so flipped on his head? But I think we go back to this idea. Immigrants are a group that look a bit different, is easy to single out and is easy to blame, so that getting rid of them will solve a problem. That's the narrative, but none of the data really support this narrative.
Let's return to what you mentioned, which I think is an important point to talk about, and that is the crime that exists in the general area of immigration is actually what goes on the border, which is another really heated topic. And there are some cartels, there are criminals that are not the immigrants themselves necessarily, but they're facilitating the cross-border transportation. They're often the ones that immigrants go to. They pay for access to some kind of route across the border. There is crime there, right?
Yes, there is a crime in smuggling through the border, weapons, people sometimes. I would say that even more than that, in the last 2 years, in 2022 and 2023 in particular, there was this image of total chaos at the border with people trying to cross, stationed at the border for a long time, generating a situation in which it looked like many could come in, some criminal could make it in. That, I think, has really focused the attention of a lot of Americans. And some crime clearly was, going on there. There was some smuggling. But on top of the crime, I also think the border image of this chaos, this lack of control of who is coming in, that, by the way, already by 2024 had subsided. The control of the border was much better, was a post-COVID episode in many respects. There was a pent-up pressure that was not well controlled, but still kind of froze this image and this idea that a lot of people, including criminal, came across. This was very damaging, and this need to be corrected. But again, if you look at the current data, this has been corrected in part, and there are smart investment to do in order to, organize better the flow at the border, control it better. And also, as we said, the complementary concept to that is that by reforming the legal immigration system, by creating a real channel for immigrants to come in legally to do work, you will reduce also a lot of this pressure. And the U.S. will be able, as we said before, to absorb a significant number of immigrants in the recent years.
That last point I want to emphasize. Oftentimes, these people are resorting, immigrants that would like to come to the United States, either because they have family or for any other reason, chaos in their existing home countries, lack of economic opportunity, whatever it may be. They have to resort to paying criminals, going through horrendous situations. I mean, people die on these treks, right? And they have to, they feel forced to resort to crossing the border in that way because there is no other way for them to get here. Do you feel like there is this, we're exacerbating the problem at the border by not improving or reforming the rest of the immigration system?
Certainly we are. This idea that the United States could plan and have some number of permits and visa for people maybe even targeted towards people in Central America or Mexico, a little bit less now, but in the past, or some Latin American countries in which people could apply for jobs and they could be employed if there is an employer that hires them. This will allow people to get in the right line and to start, thinking of moving with a plan without having no plan and piling up at the border. And as a consequence, these numbers will reduce the number of pressure at the border, but also will allow a much better screening of people. If somebody is really has a criminal background, should not be admitted, is going to be much easier to find if there is a legal way in which you can check. Sometimes maybe this requires also a little bit of a bilateral agreement with the government of the countries where these people come from. So we have seen the US only having a discussion with this country just to push people in their own jails or reject criminal. How much more economically reasonable and profitable will be to have agreement with Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Mexico, in which we have a certain number of their workers that can be absorbed here, and their government will help us to do a selection, a legal list, and come them here. Collaboration, planning in the legal side. Of course, this will require Congress to act. Of course, it will require a convergence of view on this. I see this as very, very far, but, as we are here sitting down and discussing of how to think about this problem in a positive way, that will certainly be part of the solution.
Yeah, it is also a little bit of a longer term solution. I think there is a lot of noise. There's a lot of people that want something like a wall or some kind. And I think a wall is indicative of greater border security. And in my mind, that actually doesn't seem, maybe not a wall specifically, but some kind of border security along with greater reforms on quotas and allowing more people in legally where we can control and screen better. Those two things can happen simultaneously. Do you agree that some kind of border security is important to maintain? I mean, we are a sovereign nation and we should know who is coming into this country.
Absolutely. Every country should decide the people who are coming into the country. This is a general principle. The United States is responsible for who comes in. And I feel that sometimes there is the defense of immigration goes to the point of letting in everybody. Not at all. The United States should decide the people who come in. In my view, should decide it based on who can contribute to the economic, demographic, and social growth of the U.S. community, and who could be admitted in a fair, efficient way for their benefit and the benefit of the country. This can be a principle which will imply that there is a control at the border, so people who are not allowed don't come in, but also imply that the number of people who come in is more reasonably in line with who can be absorbed in the U.S. It seems to me that on one end, the principle is always everything that comes in from outside is bad, so let's only protect and close. And then either the boogeyman or the extreme is free border. No, there is a reasonable immigration policy, which is plan how many people can come in, allow people who can come in who can contribute. And right now, many more people could come in and contribute than they actually are, and sort of use as a principle the growth, success of the U.S. that absorb them, and the fairness and success of the immigrant themselves. This seems to be important principle. I think we can agree on this in a broader way than we have in the past, and so that's my view.
That's a great segue. I want to talk a little bit about, I love what you just said. So the premise of American immigration policy, the system should be based on how can we maximize economic and social growth for Americans. And immigration is a tool in which our country can benefit all. Like immigration is a thing which, if discussed well with data backing and with intelligent minds working on a system here, it can really improve everyone's situation. Let's zoom out a little bit and look at this immigration system that we've talked about. We've talked a little bit about the fear-based narratives. Why is the public narrative so off base from reality here? across all things, across who immigrants are, what they're doing in this country, the impact that they have on our economy as a whole and on specific towns and cities? Why is the information completely opposite than the truth, than reality?
So this is a very good question, and it's not an easy one to answer. But I think that the core of the issue is that very often people come to immigration with very strong predetermined ideas rather than with a willingness to first learn what are the facts on the ground and then think what will be a solid principle to base policies on. So I think that reasonable policies should start from people maybe pushing aside for the moment what they think they know and what are their prejudices, and starting from learning what immigration has been in the US in the last decades, who the immigrants are, what the immigrants do, and with the idea of designing or trying to go towards a system which maximizes the welfare and the benefit for Americans, for American communities, but is fair and efficient towards the immigrant. Also, not arbitrary, not chaotic. That's another important thing. We can build some pieces of this. And so admitting immigrants for working reasons. This, to me, should be the core of an immigration system. Admitting relatives in the immediate family, spouse and minor children, should be something that we need to preserve the nuclear family. Extended family, not so much. It can be less. Having a small in percentage but significant percentage of humanitarian refugees. This is something that the US has always done, and I think is also important. Balancing the immigrants who come in between high-skilled and low-skilled. A lot of the benefits that I talked about come from having both parts, and even fiscal benefit and growth benefit will come. So not just one of the two, but a way for working people to come. I think all these principles seem to me that will be agreed upon once Americans understand what are the benefits for them that can come from this in a period as we are going towards of demographic decline, of aging of the population, of needs in some sector which are not going to be filled by American, but also in a period where we're going in which the US has been in the past for even in the imperfection of its immigration system, the US has been a model of how to integrate people from all over the world. The US is really a unique country in terms of look at the variety of people we have here. European countries are much later and much less. Asian countries don't even begin to have this variety of people. So even with the limit of the immigration system in the US really has been genuinely a nation of immigrants. And just continuing and reinterpreting this in the modern need of the nation, to me, will be the natural thing to do. As much as today we are aggravated by what we hear in negative, sometimes I read people in the 60s and in the 70s, Americans who were talking about immigration and how generous was the United States, for instance, towards refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, who have become a group of incredibly productive cities, and how generous was the US towards the citizens of Yugoslavia and ex-Soviet Union, who have become incredibly productive. We need to go back a little bit to that feeling, and we need to modernize and organize things driven by economic, demographic, social growth, and fairness. I hope what we can communicate to people once all the animosity is a little bit pushed aside.
I love what you said, that this all needs, both sides are wrong, both parties, everyone, I think, has a level of misunderstanding here. My mind has been completely shattered today because I have been reading the news like a normal person and understanding what's going on and looking around, and the information that is available out there is so not steeped in any kind of data and real information for people like yourself that have spent decades studying this. So I think I want to emphasize that I think your point is right, that if there is any positive changes to be made that would benefit all Americans, it needs to start with all of us stepping back and being like, okay, what do we actually know? What can we agree on? Because I think actually there is so much here that we could agree on. I think there are principles here that every single American, regardless of background, age, anything, that we can sit down and say, what do we want? We want what's best for American communities and those that want to be integrated into them in a meaningful, real, calm way. What if you were in control of the immigration system, or if we could wave a magic wand and make some policy changes that we think could benefit significantly Americans and American communities, where would you start?
So you're asking in terms of what simple, targeted policies I think have a chance of being a starting point where to converge to change immigration. So let me say one thing first. I think the principle that we discussed before, so this idea that immigrants come to work, so work has to be important, balanced between high skill and low skill, some humanitarian, immediate family preserved, and ability to adjust maybe also the number of people to the absorption capacity of the economy. This will be a very important principle to follow. In specific, given where we are right now, what are some of the ideas where we can converge in terms of policy? So I thought until the very recent months that one dimension that we all agreed was this idea that one very special group of immigrants are the people who come to study in the United States. And as I told you before, only very few of them stay in the United States. So if you come in the US, study, you're successful, you have a company that hires you, you should have the ability to get a green card. So these graduates in the US maybe give a preferred STEM area if we think that that's particularly important to stay. To me, that's a very easy way of integrating immigrants because they come in, they learn how to be an American in college, as we all learn because we go in another city. They are highly skilled, they want to stay in the US, they have a job. That seems so easy. And there will be a way of admitting high skilled, which will increase significantly the supply of high skilled. This was actually a proposal that President Trump mentioned in the campaign as one of the things that could be positive. So I thought that was a way of converging. Unfortunately, instead, right now, the attitude towards foreign students has changed. But that seemed to be one little piece that could have been implemented. Another piece, again, in this very contentious area of undocumented, is these people who came as kids with no fault of their own, and the idea of starting, at least giving them some opportunity. Many of them have studied in the US, they are working in the US, at least showing that there is a way that initial problem at entry for some at least can be fixed if you live a lifetime. That would seem to me so powerful. And again, I think if you talk about people of different opinion, they will agree that these people came in, and if they have done well, they should have. So this seemed achievable, not so big changes until a few months ago. Right now, I see that we are very stuck. And maybe right now, the thing that we need is to chill out a little bit and try to find a way of talking about these topics without having to fight on them. And the policy are going to come when we can sit down rather than fight about this.
I think those are practical solutions that your research has shown would actually increase the economic opportunity of Americans. It would benefit individual Americans. I think when you talk about the economy, it's like, okay, it's this big kind of analogous. No one knows what that means, right? But I think it is important to mention that the changes that you're talking about would benefit all of us as individuals. It seems like one other thing potentially is the arbitrariness I think we've talked about of some of the numbers here. Before you even get into specific who should we let in and why, do you think it's rational to say, let's take a step back and use some data here to predict what are the needs that we will have in the labor markets. As you mentioned, the United States demographic is changing rapidly. I read that by 2040, immigration is expected to be the sole driver of U.S. population growth, in part because the population is aging. The people that maybe once were all types of workers are now getting too old to do those jobs, and there is not enough young people born in the United States right now to fill those jobs. So immigration is actually going to become a lot more of an important topic and a really crucial driver of American growth if sustained. What would, starting from a data, information-driven, very logical and economist perspective, look like?
A very simple way to approach this would be to think about the changes that the American labor force will have in the next 5 years. It's easy to calculate how many people will lose in working age. And I had a paper I studied that already in the period post-COVID, we lost about 500,000 workers per year of working age just because of aging and not being replaced. A year, fewer. So the US born labor force shrank. And in that period, the inflow of immigrants was large enough to actually offset a little bit so that in aggregate, the labor force has stayed relatively constant. But going forward, we will lose more. So one would be to what would it take to stabilize, at least to keep the labor force of the US as it is so that some jobs don't disappear and economy don't start to shrink. Set some aggregate number in that way. And then look at the labor market to see where job offerings are relative to employed and decide what type of distribution cross-sector. I am not in favor of a policy that, from the government point of view, dictate exactly on what job. I think that the policy should give the broad line. So we should decide how many with college education and how many on jobs which are simpler. Out of these extra, say, 500,000 that we can absorb will come. And so in this way, demographic and economics can lead and guide very well. Who do we want? How many do we want? And then if people are worried to change this number a lot, I would say that year by year, we should start from how many we admitted last year and absorbed, and then change it a little bit on the margin based if the economy has been growing or if it's been contracting up or down, so we can do something gradual. All of this require a system of immigration which is a little bit more flexible and responsive than really is right now. Would require, unfortunately, a functional Congress in order to do that. But that will be something where the economists could say, we can absorb this many so that the economy doesn't shrink. Plus also thinking about the retiree versus worker ratio, which is a very important number for pension system. We will want to admit enough people so that ratio does not become too large in favor of retired. So these two principles, keep the labor force and don't have a retirement to working age ratio that goes out of control, distributing them across skills depending on the demand, jobs relative to employment, would be to me very sound principle and not even that hard to implement. And then who will select the immigrants to come in the country? Well, I think it's, again, if working is a big thing, companies, firms, universities, schools will look and think who's the best fit for what they do. The government will check that these people are not criminal, they're honest, but also let the economy and the society connect with the right type of immigrant. One reason why I think university immigrant people who come is very good is that university always look for who they think is going to be most successful, and they select people based on thinking, this person will do well and it will be a very successful person. And so the government sometimes is not as good in identifying who is needed for a job or who is needed for a position. So let the government be the filter and the checker of the safety, security, dictate the aggregate number, put the quotas, change the quotas according to the economy, and let individual agents also play an important role in this. To me, that would be an ideal system.
If all of that happens, I would be very hopeful that the America in 10, 20, 30 years would be a better one than we have today.
Yes, I would be happy if American is not getting worse. I think, again, I want to acknowledge, I am an immigrant who came to the US And I am incredibly grateful to this country. I am incredibly grateful. And a lot of people who I know who came in just found the possibility of having success just based on our ideas, our quality of work. This is something which, again, coming even from Europe, is something you don't see as diffused. So on one end, I think the US has shown the world how to be a nation of immigrants in a very effective way. I just will want that the US does not regress on this. And if we can make even some progress, I would be extremely happy about that. Yes.
Dr. Peri, I can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise. You have spent so many years understanding what's going on here, and it is information that I think every American deserves and should know. If there is one thing that you think every American should understand about the current immigration system, about what's going on in the world in regards to immigration, what is one thing that you wish everybody would understand, would know?
I wish they understood the incredible value of immigrants to the US, to any country where they go, but in particular how they have been really an engine of incredible growth. They have been, with all their range of skills, an important component of what America is, of the success, why America is the most innovative country in the world, why America is the biggest economy in the world. I wish they could just understand deeply how important this has been and continues to be for the U.S. success, so that when they sit down and think about all the news that they receive, they really start from a point of correct and truthful understanding of what immigration has been and continue to be for us for Americans who are here, and how much we have and we've grown and we have benefited from this phenomenon.
Thank you, Dr. Peri. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. It was great talking to you.